Okay, good evening. Welcome to the latest installment of Building the Scottish State Show with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught, here on the 21st of April, 2022. And I have the great pleasure to have with me wee ginger Doug, Paul Kavanagh with me this evening to discuss all things independent and whatever else comes up. So first of all, Paul, thank you for being with us this evening.
Hi there.
Yeah. Okay. So if you could just maybe inform your readers and the viewers just how you're doing in general, given in the wake of your health issues.
Yeah, well, it's been it's been slow progress, but I mean, I think a lot of people might know that I had a massive stroke in October 2020. It just came out the blue, actually. I don't have a history there's no family history of anything like that. I wasn't like heavily overweight, I gave up smoking many years ago, I don't have any heart issues or anything, so there was nothing. It just wasn't on the radar, having a stroke. Although in retrospect, there was a couple of warning signs that I just kind of ignored. So if anybody's watching and experience these things, go to your doctor and get it investigated. I had partial blindness in my left eye. It was like a shutter came down, and there was a big black spot in my left eye, and that happened twice. But both times it only lasted for like 20 seconds or so, and then it went away. So I never really thought much of it, and I had a couple of dizzy spells as well where I thought I was going to fall over. And in retrospect, they were, like foreshocks of the stroke. And if I'd had that investigated, they could maybe have, prevented the stroke from happening. So if you do experience anything like that, I would very strongly advise you to go to your doctor, because you don't want to have a stroke. It's not fun.
Okay. All right. Okay. And how is your work been going with regard to contributing to the National and your blog?
Well, I've had to slow down a lot. One of the things they did tell me in the hospital was, I mean, before I had the stroke, I was blogging every day. I was also writing for the National, and I was diving about all over Scotland doing speaking engagements. And they did tell me that the amount of work I was doing may well have been a contributory factor to the stroke. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but they did tell me that I needed to slow down. But slowing down has been kind of forced upon me, because I just can't do the amount of things that I used to do. One of the worst problems that I've got now is fatigue. Post-stroke fatigue is one of the most common symptoms after a stroke. And when it comes on, it just wipes you out. You're just flattened by it. And I've got to pace myself. And that's one of the hardest things that I've had to learn is pacing myself so that I don't hit that brick wall of fatigue. So I've had to cut down on the amount of stuff that I do, because I just simply don't have the strength or the stamina for it. I got some bad news last week. It took 9 months on a waiting list, no, more than 9 months, nearly a year on a waiting list to get an assessment for driving. Because I thought, well, maybe if I got an adapted car, because I've only got one hand that I can use now, and it's my right hand, and I was very dominantly left-handed before the stroke. So I had an assessment last week to see if I would be suitable for an adapted car. But unfortunately, they've told me that I'm never going to drive again, which is a bit of a bummer. It wasn't entirely unexpected. One of the issues that I had after the stroke was that the part of my brain, the part of your brain that deals with visual processing at the back here, and my stroke was towards the back of the brain. And after the stroke, I had this issue with not registering what was on the left hand side of my visual field. It wasn't my eyes that were the problem; it was both my eyes. It was the visual processing, and that's still a problem. The occupational therapist that assessed me said that it's very minor, the problem that I've got. She says, but it's definitely still there. She says you compensate for it quite well, but you're compensating for it by making sure that you pay attention to what's going on the left. But obviously, by paying attention to what's going on the left, you're not paying attention to what's going on in the right, and that's not safe if you're driving. Also, my reaction times are a lot slower than they used to be. But the biggest problem was I just don't have the dexterity in my right hand to be able to manipulate, to control a car with just the right hand, and all the controls for the lights, the indicators, the horn, the windscreen wipers, and everything is on a button pad that's on this handle thing that's on the steering wheel. And I just couldn't manage it. So I found it really difficult to get the car lined up properly on the road. So she said realistically, she said it's been a year and a half since you had your stroke. So any improvement that you make in the future will be marginal. So it's not going to be enough to get you to drive again. So I'm not going to drive, basically. And that's a problem because I can't walk very far either. So I can manage maybe like 200 meters. You know, I can get to the end of the street with a walking stick, and then I'm just knackered. You know, and public transport.
And of course, we observed the passing of Ginger as well. Have you
Yes,
gotten another?
it was that happened 5 days after the stroke.
Wow.
So that was a bitch of a week.
That's got to be connected somewhere. That's got to be connected.
That was a bad week. That was a bad week.
Yeah.
Well, he was already on his way out, to be honest. And I'd said to my husband just a week before I had the stroke that I don't think we're going to have Ginger for much longer. I mean, I've had dogs ever since I was 18, and I'm going to be 60 this year. So I've had dogs for 40 odd years.
Yeah. And you haven't replaced him? Or... Paul's cut out, apparently. Okay, we were speaking to Wee Ginger Doug. We hope we'll get him back quickly. I wanted to speak to him when he gets back. I hope to speak about the state of the independence movement at this point, given that he had a stroke, and the independence movement also has had a rough going of it, and with a lot of division within the independence movement. And I really hope that I can speak to Paul about that, assuming that he gets back here relatively quickly. While I'm here, just to give you an update on the SSRG, the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group. We started a series of road shows last week. Last week we had our first one. You can watch it on Independence Live, and we will not have one this Saturday. We'll have one the following Saturday, and then we'll have a week off for the council elections, and then we will be banging on with another 8 road shows in a row at different points. You can go to the we're redoing the website, scottishsovereigntyresearchgroup.org, and it's looking really good. The person who's developing it is making it much slicker, much better, and adding features to it, so that it will be much more presentable and much more functional to develop for constitutional development, and also we're creating a very important survey over different aspects of what an independent Scotland should be, and so again, hopefully that will be emerging on the website scottishsovereigntyresearchgroup.org in the coming weeks. We are also planning basically a conference that I will be coming from France to Scotland for the 29th, 30th, and 31st of July in Dunfermline. And I believe we have secured the attendance of Alex Salmond and Jim Sillers, hopefully among the conference participants. And we hope to get as many people, both from ALBA, the SNP, and others, to decide how to go forward, and how to, in the absence of meaningful Oh, good. We have Paul back. Excellent.
Yeah, sorry, my computer crashed, so.
Okay, all right, you're back. That's the main thing. So I was in the when you were off, I was just saying that I wanted to talk to you about kind of the state of the state of the independence movement at this point,
Right,
because it's
right.
been a pretty rough couple of years, I think, for a lot of us. And so,
Yeah,
and so
it has.
just give me your perspective on it and how you see things. You know, how the things have developed over the last couple of years to where the polls haven't moved much. There doesn't seem to be much action on it, and I think you can safely say that there's growing impatience within the independence movement. So what's your perspective on it?
Well, I'm not surprised that there's not a lot of movement in the polls, to be honest, because I think those of us that are really engaged with politics tend to assume that everybody is equally as engaged.
Yeah.
But they're not. And we live in a country where the media is overwhelmingly opposed to independence and doesn't want to talk about it. So most people aren't going to start thinking about independence until they have a reason to.
Yeah.
And they won't have a reason to until they know when there's going to be an independence referendum.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not entirely surprised that there's not a great deal of movement in the polls. I do think it's quite interesting that support for independence has held up quite well.
Mm-hmm.
Despite the fact that, as you say, there has been a lot of, well, shall we say, dissension within the independence movement, and we don't have any firm date for an independence referendum.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what do you see as the sources of the conflict? There's there's the GRA bill. There's the perception that the Scottish government is sort of has been given numerous mandates both in Holyrood and Westminster elections, and they haven't acted on them. But there's been the COVID. There's been now the war in Ukraine. All of this stuff. I mean, what do you think are the main impediments to holding the next referendum, and when do you think, in your view, when do you think we'll know more about what?
Well, I do think that we will definitely have an independence referendum within the lifetime of this Parliament. Because if we don't, then it really is game over for the SNP, and I think the SNP leadership is aware of that.
Yeah,
they know that they have to deliver on an independence referendum, because if they don't, then that is really it for them. So I'm quite confident that we will have an independence referendum. But I mean, all the talk about, oh no, we've had all these mandates and they've never been acted on. The point, I sometimes think people get focused on process and not on result, because the point of the exercise isn't to have a referendum. The point of the exercise is to win independence. And it's all very well saying, okay, we need to push for an independence referendum, but if we push for an independence referendum that we lose, we really are screwed, because the next independence referendum really will be the last one, because the British state will make sure that we don't have another.
Yeah.
So the stakes are a lot higher this time than they were in 2014. So we really do have to get it right. And, I don't agree with those people that say things like COVID was just an excuse. People were dying. People were afraid to leave the house. There was a whole lot of stuff going on, and it was impossible under those circumstances to have a proper independence referendum campaign. And it's different from from an election. The difference is that the anti-independence parties are always going to try and undermine the legitimacy of a referendum in a way that they're not going to try and undermine the legitimacy of an election, because obviously having an election is a legal obligation. Having an independence referendum is a political obligation. It's not a legal obligation. So And given the fact that we have a media in Scotland which is overwhelmingly opposed to Scottish independence, it is vitally important that the independence movement is able to make use of as many avenues and routes as it possibly can in order to counter that preponderance of anti-independence sentiment in the Scottish media.
Mhm.
And without being able to do that kind of face-to-face grassroots campaigning, which characterised the 2014 referendum, we would have lost a referendum that was held under the circumstances of COVID, because we weren't able to make use of those tactics that are vital for our success, and also because the anti-independence parties would have been weaponising the epidemic, and any uptick in death rates or infection rates would immediately have been blamed on independence, the independence movement, the independence campaign, and that would have been a message that they would have hammered in relentlessly, and so I really don't think, speaking as someone who now permanently has one hand tied behind his back, and a manner of speaking, I really think it's foolish to go into a referendum campaign with one hand tied behind your back, and that's what we would have been doing during the COVID epidemic.
Okay, and how much? And the Scottish government has been promising some kind of prospectus, kind of an update of the 2014 white paper. Given the changed political landscape. How precise do you think something like that should be? In terms of setting out what an independent Scotland would be, and I'm because I'm apparently there are people working on it. I don't know who. The Scottish government has not said exactly who that is. Are they consultants? Are they Deloitte? Or who is planning it? And what are they planning? And and how?
I think one of the problems that we had in 2014 was that the white paper was too detailed in a lot of respects. It gave the Better Together campaign a lot of things to attack, and also because of their relentless focus on associating the cause of independence with the specific policies of the Scottish government of the day, we found ourselves getting into, frankly, ridiculous arguments. Like, for example, one of the things at the time was the Scottish government examined at the time wanted to reduce corporation tax, right? So we got into all these arguments about independence being somehow predicated on the rate of corporation tax, which is, of course, a nonsense. It's up to the Scottish government and independent Scotland to decide what that should be, and different governments would have different views on that. I see there's a couple of questions popping up.
Yeah, you're welcome to address them as you.
Do I get social work help to get about and for adaptations? At the moment, no. I have applied for PIP. I put off applying for it for a very long time for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because I can't hold a pen anymore. So they don't actually make it easy for you. The Department of Work and Pensions don't actually make it easy for you to apply for PIP. You can't apply for it online. You have to fill in a paper form to do it. And I physically couldn't fill in a paper form. And also, so I needed to get someone to do the form for me. And you really need to get someone that knows the system to do it, to make sure you've got the best chance of getting the benefit. But all the advice bureaus and information offices, they were all closed because of COVID. So it took me an awful long time to get an application done. I finally got a telephone appointment with a council advice centre in Ayr that did the application for me over the phone. And that application is now away, although I've been warned that it's going to take many months before I'll actually get a result, but that's just the way it goes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And what do you think are the things that what lessons would you draw from 2014, particularly regarding the media, as our viewers hopefully know that we both participated in the movie London Calling, about how the BBC basically stole the independence referendum. What
Yeah.
do you think should be done? How should things be done differently by the Yes campaign to overcome, as you correctly pointed out, this overwhelming hostility of most of the mainstream media towards independence?
Well, I think we have to do a lot of the things that we did in 2014. That we have to, we have to do a lot of that face-to-face campaigning. The local grassroots stuff. The town hall meetings and those kind of things, in order to bring the message of independence into local communities. Because I think one of the things that I think is very noticeable is that people have, like I've said this before, people have a hierarchy of trust about information that they receive, and information that they get online is way down at the bottom. There's two things I think that really predicate how much trust people put in information. One is the relationship that they have with the information giver, and the other is the amount of money and effort that's put into producing that information in the first place. So I think a lot of people tend to trust television more than they trust, say, a newspaper, because it costs an awful lot more to produce a television program than it does to produce a newspaper. But the information that people trust most of all is information that they get from people that are known to them personally, and that's where I think we had a big success in 2014, because it was a lot of word, mouth to mouth information, and that's how we managed to increase information. That's how we managed to increase the support for independence to the extent that we did, despite the fact that the media was overwhelmingly against us. I'm glad you've got your wee ginger, Stephen. So.
Yeah, and what do you think? What do you think can be done to kind of help mend the divisions that have been sowed over the last, a couple of years? With Alaba being created,
I mean, I do think that once we have a date for an independence referendum, I do hope that will help to concentrate minds, and that people will. People will then focus on making the arguments for independence rather than attacking one another on tactics and strategy. Because I think sometimes we forget that we are actually all on the same side, those of us that want independence. We might have different ideas about the best way to get there, or the best way to get to a referendum. But I think once we've got, a date for a referendum, I think that will focus people's minds and will concentrate on the task at hand. Because I think part of the problem that we've got at the moment is that it's kind of dissipated that energy that we had in 2014.
Absolutely.
Because in 2014 it was all very focused. We had a date. We had a date for a referendum in 2014, and so we were focused on that laser sharp focus. Whereas at the moment we're kind of all over the place because we don't have that date. So.
Okay, and what is your view on alternate routes to independence? I mean, Nicola, proclaimed the Section 30 to be the gold standard, in order to get, I believe, according in her view, would be so that it has the international legitimacy to do that, that they can go to the outside world and say, look, we've got this legally.
Well, I think she said it was the gold standard. She didn't say it was the only standard.
That's true, but yeah, I agree with that. But it just doesn't seem as if they're willing to countenance other routes. And in our group, the SSRG, we've done quite a bit of research into what would be considered, recognized as internationally legitimate.
Yeah, I think
there's a number of ways it can be done. It doesn't have to be through.
Yeah, but I think really the problem is with alternate routes is that we have to do we already have a recognised route to Scottish independence, because we had that before in 2014.
Mhm.
You know, we got a Section 30 order, we had a referendum, and we have to do that route to death before we can legitimately turn to other routes, you know, and get it
Mhm.
recognised by the international community, because sovereignty is, well, it's like money, you know, it only has value because other people recognise it as such.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
have to get other people to other countries to recognise Scottish sovereignty, and they'll only do that if they know that, you know, that we have pursued to the death uh, the existing route towards getting an independence referendum, and
Mhm.
that Westminster has refused it because they are terrified of losing it.
Mhm.
You know,
Well,
and
they already
anything.
have. I mean, in the sense that I mean, Boris Johnson has said no way. You know, I mean, and I don't know. You know, and so if they, if you know, if the Scottish government continues to ask, he continues to say no. From what I understand, I think IndyCar Gordon was in communication with Michael Russell, who essentially said that they're just going to go ahead with the referendum bill and basically dare the UK government to block it, but they probably will, and it'll probably end up in court. I mean, that's just, you know, I mean, it would just almost seem almost logical. So it's like, then what, you know? And there's no, in our view, there's no reason that, for example, given that the UK is based on a
Yes, I
bilateral
know, Billy, we
treaty.
are already sovereign, but the point is to get other people to recognise that we are already sovereign.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah,
all very well
yeah,
saying we. I mean, you can get a bit of paper and you can write £5 note on it, but good luck with trying to spend that in the shops. That's
right.
where
Yeah.
we are with sovereignty.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Anyway.
Okay. So and and so what do you think would be a good, you know, media strategy in for another referendum? Do you think, I mean, is it just kind of hopeless to even think that, you know, you could get the, you know, some of the big media on the side of independence, aside from, say, for example, the National? Or I mean, you know, what do you think is the best strategy for combating the this?
Well, I think we can forget about the BBC.
Mhm.
You know, the BBC is always going to be an arm of the British state. You know, it's always going to be, it's always going to take, you know, Britishness as the default, and anything else is going to be viewed critically and skeptically. You know, and that's just the reality of the BBC.
Mhm.
Um, I think we may have more success with some of the print media next time round, um,
Mhm.
because we are starting off from, you know, a much higher support base for independence than we did in 2014. But
Mhm.
I do think it's. I mean, I've always said this. I've said this for years that, you know, if Scotland had a media that genuinely reflected the range of views in Scotland, we'd be independent already.
Oh,
You
easy.
know,
Yeah. Mhm.
we don't, and that's a big part of the problem.
And is it mostly just because they're, you know, the big media is corporate owned, and that they have, you know, you know, whether it's Rupert Murdoch or these other, the Barclay brothers, or these other,
I don't think
you
it's so
know,
much that they're corporate owned. I think is that they are London centric.
yeah.
You
Mhm.
know, I mean, the Scottish media is very weak. It's very weakly established. The media in Scotland. You know, most of what we regard as, you know, Scottish media is actually Scottish versions of English newspapers.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Right.
basically they just changed the sports pages. You know,
Uh-huh.
but you know they are newspapers that basically they take a London metropolitan view as their view, and we kind of tweak it for a Scottish readership, you know, but
Mhm.
it's essentially we get a non-Scottish media. You know, it was very deliberate for the Labour Party, when, you know, when devolution was being discussed in the 1990s. Originally, you know, broadcasting was going to be devolved, you know, and broadcasting's devolved in Spain. It's devolved just about everywhere else where there's a measure of regional or national autonomy for, you know, non-independent nations.
Mhm.
But the Labour Party refused to allow broadcasting to be devolved because they were aware of the power of of independent, the power of a media in, and enforcing, a sense of, if you like, Britishness, and that's what they were afraid of losing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I do think that the next independence referendum is going to be very different in character from the first one.
Mm-hmm.
I think because the better together Mark II is not going to be able to plausibly, it's not going to be able to plausibly, hold out a carrot of, stronger, better, faster devolution the way that it did in 2014, because nobody's going to believe that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're really, it's going to be a much more negative campaign, I think. In terms of what's coming out of the British nationalist side, and I think we can also, it's going to be, but I mean we do have some strong advantages. I think it's going to be a lot harder for opponents of independence next time round to portray themselves the way they did quite successfully for most people in 2014 as being non-nationalist, as opposed to the nationalists who want independence. I think it's very obvious now that British nationalism is far more toxic and far more reactionary and parochial than Scottish nationalism ever was. So it's not going to be a choice of you're voting between nationalism and non-nationalism as a vote. You're voting between Scottish independence or British nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they really played very heavily in that lack of in the English language of that there's no the word nationalist in English means two different things. Like in Spanish, it's nacionalismo is a different thing from independentismo.
Yeah.
And supporting independence is different from nationalism. Whereas in English, the word nationalist covers both of those things. And I think that was very, very successfully weaponized by the Better Together campaign in 2014. But I think now, post-Brexit, I think they're going to find that a lot harder to pretend that opposing Scottish independence means opposing nationalism in general. I think that's going to be a much, much harder proposition for them now.
Okay. And what is your view once assuming once Scotland gets independence? What do you think would be the best route regarding Europe? I mean, because I've had a lot of conversations in my group about possibly joining EFTA, and we actually contacted EFTA and asked if the last if the last Holy Road elections last May, almost a year ago, were used as a plebiscite for independence, would EFTA accept that as legitimate to be considered a state to belong to EFTA? And they basically said, as long as the Scottish government has the competences to sign international treaties and the powers to abide by them, they could join. They would have no problem. They would love, as EFTA would love to have Scotland in.
I'm sure they would.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I would rather join the EU. I mean, that's my personal preference, but that has to be a decision that's made by the people of Scotland after independence. And I think it's a mistake to conflate too many issues into the independence vote. I mean, I have my own personal views. I mean, I would like to be an independent Scotland to be a member of the European Union. I would like an independent Scotland to be a republic, but I think mixing that all in to the ballot during the independence referendum would be a mistake, because it might alienate people that don't want to be a member of the EU or are quite happy with a monarchy, for example.
Yeah.
And I think that's dangerous. I think. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, how many people are still alive that really support the monarchy in your view? I mean, it just seems to me as if. And I was just going to mention, you may have read about Kate and William's beautiful trip to the Bahamas, where they were in Jamaica, and they basically said, "We're leaving. You're no longer going to be our
I think it's losing.
monarch. You know,
I do think that the monarchy, at least in Scotland, won't last much longer than Lizzie.
I think that's the case for most of the Commonwealth, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people are, you know, a lot of people. I think a lot of countries, you know, even Australia or Canada, are, you know, just waiting for Lizzie to keel, and you know, and then they'll make their moves after that. But I mean, the idea of a King Charles is just, you know, beyond comprehension. So yeah,
or another King Billy. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, but what would you think of the prospect of, because as I said, I spoke to EFTA, and they basically it could, you know, Scotland could be a member within weeks, not months, and there's nothing, or you know, not years, and there's nothing preventing Scotland from joining the EU at a later date. But with EFTA, at least they'll be back in the EEA and, you know, the European area.
Well, I think it's going to be very important to get back into the single market and the customs union, you know, as quickly as possible. But on the other hand, that does raise issues about the nature of the border with England, and we're going to have answers to those questions, because, you know, we didn't really need to answer that question in 2014, because it was like, well, everybody's a part of the European Union, it's not going to be a problem, but it is now, you know, and we are going to have to. I mean, personally, I'm quite relaxed about the prospect of a border with England. You know, borders are natural, borders are normal, borders are common across Europe. It's not this big scary thing that the anti-independence people try to make out it as being. The other thing I think is important to, you know, we need to bang on about is that Scotland would still remain, like the Republic of Ireland is now, a member of the Common Travel Area.
Yes.
After independence. So any border checks that are going to be in place, it's only going to affect commercial traffic.
Yes.
No one's going to stop you at Gretna and demand to see your passport.
Yeah. And also the UK has already signed deals with the EFTA countries. So in theory, if Scotland becomes part of EFTA, then they would benefit from those agreements with the RUK by the RUK as well. I mean, there are solutions to these problems. It shouldn't be,
of course.
You know, and you're absolutely right that it would, you know, because Scotland would be, you know, remain part of the common travel area, it would just be a question of goods and, you know, the transporting in between England and Scotland, but even between Scotland and Northern Ireland, because they're part of the EU, because they're part of the EU EEA, or, you know, at least the single market, then there wouldn't be any problem there whatsoever. It would only be between Scotland and basically between England and Wales and Scotland. So again, it's, as you say, it's not insurmountable by any means.
The other thing I think is important that we need to bang on about is about one of the things that I think a lot of us in Scotland found most objectionable about Brexit is that we had our European citizenship taken from us against our will. And I think it's important that we reassure, you know, people who aren't necessarily supportive of independence that Scotland becoming independent doesn't mean that they lose their British citizenship. I mean, personally, I'd quite happily burn my British passport tomorrow as long as I could get a Scottish one. You know, I don't want to have a British passport, but it does mean that there are people in this country who do feel an emotional attachment to their sense of Britishness, and it's important that we let them know that it's not up to an independent Scotland. The government of an independent Scotland does not have the power to stop them from being British.
Yes.
The only people that can do that is Westminster. And assuming that Westminster does not change its citizenship laws after Scottish independence, everybody in Scotland who is currently a British citizen will remain a British citizen after Scottish independence. And so will any children that we have as British citizens after Scotland becomes independent. They will also have British citizenship by virtue of the fact that they have parents who are British citizens. So the only people who are going to lose British citizenship, potentially, will be the grandchildren who have not been born yet. You know, of the children of children who have not been born yet. You know, we're talking like, 40 years down the line or so. By which time, God knows what might happen. Might have had World War III by then, and we'd all be dead.
Yeah, who knows? It won't. Nothing will matter anyway because we'll be
exactly. Yeah.
Let's see. So okay, and let's see. So I'm just going through some of the questions. Oh yeah, you answered that. Do you get social help? I addressed the question of well, a peace pact, or I talked to you about what you thought the would be. So EFTA can be a transition towards full EU membership, which we know 60% of the Scots voted to remain. Certainly agreed with that. Yeah, that's right. I wanted to ask about the mechanics of a second referendum, because I mean, there was, whether or not there was fraud in the first one, there was ample scope for it. I remember being at the count in Glasgow, where they would just take these boxes and just dump out all of these, paper, ballots, and then they'd be organizing them and counting them. And you had those videos of, that were suggested that there was fraud. And in my view, I don't know why they do it that way. And as I'm sure you're well aware, in Spain, they have they count, they have the voting during the day in the areas, and then they just open the box at the end. You have several observers, and they count it right then and there. And they don't, take it to some central place where, they vote, so I don't know what is in the law that they are trying to pass regarding that, but I'm just wondering, what you thought about how you could change the mechanics of it so that people would be.
Well, I don't think there was significant fraud in 2014. I think fraud's actually quite difficult to hide. Ballot fraud, ballot stuffing, or whatever. It's not that easy to get away with it, when you've got lots of independent observers at the count, as we do in this country, but you can only make a difference if the vote is very narrow, so the best way to prevent, to make sure that ballot fraud is not an issue is to make sure that we have as large a majority as possible in favour of Scottish independence. Because then, they'd have to forge a large number of ballots in order to swing the vote their way. And then it would be obvious that that's what they were doing. So, but I don't think it was an issue. And I think if you think that, that the result was stolen from us, I mean, I believe that the reason that we didn't win in 2014 wasn't because of fraud. The reason that we lost was because we didn't persuade enough people to vote yes. We did very well. We really boosted the vote, but at the end of the day, we didn't get enough people to vote yes. And that's what we need to do the next time, is to make sure that we get enough people to vote yes. But if you genuinely believe that, the independence referendum in 2014 was stolen from us, then, and that they're going to do it again, then why are we even bothering to have this conversation?
Yeah, and another question I had about it would be about the franchise, because in 2014 they basically used the local franchise, for people who had, who weren't necessarily a permanent residents, who had part-time homes up here, and people who were newly arrived and could vote as well. I'm not saying there's anything necessarily wrong with that, but for example, in France, I'm a UK citizen. I was able to vote in the local elections and the European elections until I lost it because of Brexit. But
it was the same.
I could not vote. I could not vote for anything, the presidency or the parliament.
It was the same when I lived in Spain. I was allowed to vote in local elections, the regional elections. I wasn't allowed to vote in Spanish national elections, and that was why I never bothered to apply for Spanish citizenship, which I was considering at one point. You needed to have lived there for 5 years and speak the language. And then it was just an awful lot of paperwork and a lot of hassle. And the only concrete benefit I would have got out of it was being able to vote in Spanish national elections.
Yeah, same here. And the only thing because after Brexit, all I did was go to the prefecture and get and apply, and I got a card, a carte de séjour for free.
And now I kind of wish I did,
Yeah.
I kind of wish I did now,
Yeah.
but I didn't. So
Yeah.
there we go. And I miss out
But,
on an Irish
but my
passport as well, much to my disgust.
yeah, because
My
there are.
grandfather, my great grandparents were Irish.
Mhm.
My grandfather was the youngest out of five. His four older sisters were all born in Ireland, and my great grandparents moved to Scotland when my great grandmother was pregnant with him.
Mhm.
So if she'd waited just another 3 months, I could have had an Irish passport.
Ah.
My mum's got one, but I can't get one, so that's a bummer. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. But what I was getting at is that I'm wondering if if in a referendum there could be, because for example I believe in New Caledonia they have they've had referendums relatively
yeah, they had one
frequently.
this year, did they not?
Yeah, I think so. But
Yeah,
they do have a thing with the franchise. I mean, because I know that it's, of course, it's a French, well, dom tom colony, whatever you want to call it, and they're not all of them are necessarily allowed to vote. Because a lot of French people that go there because they make double the salary that they would in
yeah,
France. But they're not longtime residents, and so why should
yeah,
they have a vote in in something as important as the independence of New Caledonia? And so apparently I haven't looked at them in detail, but they did make certain protocols on the franchise to accommodate that people, the only people that could vote were the ones that had a genuine long-term stake in the country. And
yeah.
I just think it would be good to I don't know what form it will take, but I think it would be careful to consider. And for example, I mean, in the Brexit referendum, EU citizens weren't allowed to vote
Yeah.
in that. So I'm
I
just
think it's. I
trying to.
think it's. I think it's partly a question of simplicity, really, and administrative simplicity.
Mhm.
It's easiest just to use the existing electoral roll
Yeah.
in order to, have the franchise for the referendum, because then otherwise, effectively, we are surrendering it to the British government.
Hmm.
Because the British government is the only authority which can, say, for example, Scottish people who live outside Scotland. It's only the British government which has the power to, construct an electoral roll with people who would be considered Scottish,
Hmm.
who live outside Scotland. And also it means that effectively what we would be doing is surrendering to Westminster the decision about who counts as a Scottish citizen.
Right.
And that's really a decision that should only be made by the Parliament of an Independent Scotland,
Hmm. Agreed.
and not Westminster. It shouldn't be up to Westminster to decide who counts as Scottish.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be up to Westminster whether or not they grant a Section 30. I mean, normally,
Well,
if Scotland, I mean, the whole idea of just, oh, please, Boris, will you give us a Section 30? I mean, that's essentially not, denying that Scotland
well,
has.
I don't get I get the impression that that's not what the strategy of the Scottish government is. It's
Okay.
not, oh, please give us give us a Section 30 order.
Mhm.
I think what they're doing is they're going to say, give us a Section 30 order, and if Westminster say, no, you're not going to get a Section 30 order, they're
Mhm.
going to say, well, we're just going to have a referendum anyway and dare them to challenge them in the courts.
Mhm.
So, and then we'll see what happens there,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
that obviously has enormous political ramifications,
Mhm.
about, what happens when the courts say, no, you don't have the right to have Scottish independence. You don't have the right to
Mhm.
have an independence referendum,
Mhm.
because really that changes the nature of the union, the so-called union. It changes it drastically,
Mhm.
because the central conceit of Scottish unionism has always been Scotland isn't a colony. Scotland is a constituent part of a union which it entered voluntarily and which it can leave voluntarily. That's always been the central conceit of Scottish unionism.
Mhm.
And if the Supreme Court or any other court in the United Kingdom turned around and said, well, no, actually, whoever happens to occupy number 10 Downing Street has an effective veto on whether or not Scotland gets an independence referendum, that fundamentally changes the nature of the United Kingdom and blows traditional Scottish unionism out of the water.
But how is that? Yeah, my main question is, how is that acted upon? We have seen with Boris Johnson that he is completely impervious to anything. I don't know how long he's going to still be there. I won't make any predictions.
Probably not much longer the way things are going.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, even Johnson has been careful not to say, no, you're not getting an independence referendum. You know, they've kind of hedged it around and danced around the subject because they know that saying, no, we're not ever going to let you get a Scottish independence referendum under any circumstances, that's politically explosive. They know that. You know, so they're trying to delay that as long as possible in the hope that basically that we just all go away, that we just, you know, that the independence movement just goes away. That's what they're hoping for, ultimately. That's what their strategy is. They want to exhaust us, you know, in the hope that we just go away. So, but and we're not going to go away. So,
no, I totally agree with that. And so, what do you think should be the strategy of the Scottish government to secure a referendum? Do you think they're doing the right thing and saying, okay, we're going to, you know, saying, okay, supposedly there'll be a prospectus by the end of the year, maybe a date announced within, you know, maybe in 2023, we don't know, you know, and so do you, and in my view, one of the difficulties in 2014 was there wasn't a lot to, you know, well, maybe there was too much deal to campaign on, but I was suggesting that the Scottish government, you know, in my columns with Newsnet that I know you helped edit, was suggesting
that was another world. That was another time. Oh, no. That was a long time ago.
That the Scottish government, you know, the Yes campaign should put forth in much more, you know, in much more detail. Yeah, we're going to be you know, we're going to be you know, we're going to be a republic. We're going to be, you know, we're going to have our own currency. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. You know, and be much more concrete about it, because it's you know, because there always seemed that ambivalence that you pointed out. Well, maybe there's some voters that wouldn't want to keep the monarchy, and they, you know, and that should be left for later. And but I also had other people that say, look, you know, if we're not a republic, I'm not going to vote for independence. What's the difference? Or if Scotland just becomes another corporate corrupt oligarchy like Westminster, what's the point? You know, and so I'm just wondering, you know, how, you know, in your view, is the Scottish government going about this in a good way in terms of?
Well, we have to wait and see what they come out with, you know, what their perspective for independence is going to be, you know. So it's definitely going to be. They know, I think, that it's going to be poured over by the anti-independence parties and the anti-independence media, and they're going to nitpick and find anything that they can, you know, to attack the Scottish government and the SNP, sorry, the whole idea of independence. So they have to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted before they actually publish the thing. But I do think that we have to distinguish. I think really we need to focus on the basics, and the basics for me is that independence means independence, like I was saying earlier about, you know, like, you know, rates of corporation tax. Independence isn't about, you know, Scottish corporation tax should be at this level, or it's not even that Scotland should be a member of the European Union or that Scotland should be a republic. It's that independence means that the people of Scotland get to choose these things. And that a government which is answerable to the people of Scotland and to no one else makes these decisions. Because I think one of the biggest problems that we've got just now as a society is that we have a government in Westminster which is effectively unaccountable. And, you know, that's been very highlighted at the moment, and I'm sure as somebody that's very interested in constitutions, you'll be very aware of it, that there is no mechanism in the Westminster system for impeaching a politician who has broken the law and repeatedly lied.
Yeah.
And the point is that with independence, that we can have a government which is accountable to the people of Scotland. And I've said this before, when I used to do, public speaking, I said this a lot, that the reason I want independence is because I don't trust politicians from any party. And I think that they should be held close enough to us so that their arses are within kicking distance of our feet.
Good, well put.
And that's why we need independence, so that we can kick them and we can kick them out.
Yeah.
Because at the moment we've got a government in Westminster which is fundamentally not accountable to the people of Scotland and can do what it wants. And that's what independence for me is all about. It's about accountability, and it's about holding politicians to account and having the power to do that.
Yeah,
and that's
and I think it's also very important to get the right constitutional mechanisms in place so they can't, so their ass is within kicking distance.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon, but so Paul,
just well, because my
energy
levels are just going like that just now. So so sorry. I'm afraid I just don't have the stamina that I used to have. But such is life.
Okay. Is there anything? Well, you made it for the hour, and so we're absolutely delighted. Yeah. So anything you'd like?
Getting more and more droopy. So. I noticed that other half says he knows when I'm getting tired because my face droops. So.
Anything you'd like to say before to our listeners before we sign off?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for all the support that so many people have given me. It meant a lot when I was in a very, very dark place. Because there was a time I didn't know if I was going to walk again. I really didn't know. I didn't know if I was going to be able to work again, and I had so many messages of love and support from so many people, and it really made a world of difference. And I am going to get another dog.
Okay. Well, the affection towards you is well earned because you're a lovely person, and we we love your writing, and okay. So thanks. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're getting a few messages up here, just wishing Paul well, and so thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and stick around for a couple minutes if you want after the.
All right, cheers.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.